If you have retirement savings and you're exploring franchise ownership, there's a funding strategy you may never have heard of, and your financial advisor may not have mentioned it either. It's called Rollovers for Business Startups, or ROBS. Its legal foundation dates back to an act of Congress in 1974, but it didn't enter mainstream use as a business funding strategy until the 2000s. In this episode, funding specialist Al Lesko breaks down exactly how it works, what it requires, and what you need to know before deciding if it should be a part of your franchise funding strategy. I'm Scott Elliott with New Chapter Consulting, and this is Ownership Essentials, Practical Insights for Successful Business Ownership. Today, my guest is Al Lesko. Al is the president of Fund My Franchise, where he's spent over a decade helping aspiring owners find the right funding strategy for their franchise investment. Al, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm really excited about our conversation today because today we're going to dive into rollovers for business startups. Rob's comes up regularly when I'm having franchise funding conversations with my clients, and I find not a lot of people have heard about it. Maybe, Al, if you could help us, maybe start at the beginning. What is Rob's? Where did it come from? And what problem was it designed to solve?
Well, the acronym stands for Rollovers for Business Startups, and probably the best way to do it is to put it in layman's term. It's actually a retirement strategy where you can have a portfolio of investments, whether it be stocks and bonds, gold, silver, whatever it is. It's a retirement account set up for a business ownership and its employees that also owns ownership in the business itself. So, for example, the business is part of the 401k. The business owner owns the 401k. The business owner also becomes an employee of the business. Therefore, they have a retirement account set up for them to set aside money for their eventual retirement, build wealth through the retirement account, and
Mhm.
also for their employees to contribute to and have a retirement account of their own. Um, it's been around a long time, all the way back to 1974, but really hasn't. I just don't think there's been enough exposure to it because it's a really good option.
So it becomes part of the retirement strategy for the business, but it also is part of a funding strategy where when your retirement account invests in your business, that capital becomes capital available to you to launch your business. Is that in essence correct?
Yes, and there's only a few qualified plans and the custodians, which would be the holder of the funds, that are
Right.
allowed to do this. I like to tell people it's really a hedge or diversification of your retirement account.
Mm.
And there's some really good examples of that. I mean, if you look back to the last 20, 25 years and you look at what the stock market goes up, it goes down. I mean, people are just like, I don't know what to do. And, if you look at a long term play out of the stock market, if you have 30 years to invest, your return just on average, 7.5, 8%, over a long period of time based on what you contribute. So
Mhm.
my feeling is what's more important is not so much of actually using your retirement account, but being smart about choosing the right business to have and to make this investment. If it can give you a 10% return year over year and is going to be in demand for 10, 20 years, and not be taken over by technology, why wouldn't you want that as part of your portfolio?
Mhm. No, it's a great way of looking at it. Now, it's rollovers for business startups. So is it really only for brand new businesses, or can you use Rob's to buy into an existing business or an established franchise? Like, what are the limits there?
You absolutely can. In fact, even a
Yeah.
business that maybe was an LLC or an S Corp could also be converted. There's a way to do that and
Mm.
convert that and say, hey, look, I need to bring more funds into business. basically your corporation is buying out the LLC or the S Corp. So, yes, it can be done for an existing business that's a non franchise. It can be done for an existing business that you need to recapitalize, you don't want to take on a loan. There's a lot of different strategies that we
Mhm.
talk through with clients.
Okay, no, it's great. So very flexible when someone wants to get into business for themselves, whether that means starting a business or buying a business. This is an option that they should be considering, at least evaluating. It's whether or not it works for them. Now, you mentioned the C Corp. So Rob's requires a specific business structure with the C Corp. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Why does that structure matter to how this works? Why the C Corp?
Okay, so if you look at an S corp or an LLC, they're considered what is a pass-through entity. In other words, you're taxed as an individual based upon the earnings of that business. Whereas a C corp is a standalone entity. It pays its own taxes. You become a W-2 employee of that C corp, and that is the only structure the IRS allows for this particular plan. And sometimes that there's some trepidation in there depending on who's giving the advice and where it's coming from and what their area of expertise is.
Mhm. Okay. But the short answer is because the C Corp creates the standalone entity, that's the why the IRS requires that if you want to do Rob's, you have to use a C Corp. Plain and simple.
Correct.
Okay, good. Now, you mentioned early on about the tax strategy that could be involved here. So, beyond the mechanics of just getting money into the business, what are some ways that Rob's might fit into the longer term tax picture?
Okay. I'll try to give it I'll give an example.
Okay, sure.
Um, for one, you have a retirement account that you're in control of. Let's use the custodian. Let's use Charles Schwab, for example. So
Mhm,
you move money from an existing retirement account into the Charles Schwab account. You now have access to all of the options that Charles Schwab offers, which is more than a corporate plan where you're working with somebody else. On
mhm,
top of that, now that you have that money in there, you also have control. If you don't like your financial advisor, which you cannot do working for someone else, you simply call up Charles Schwab, said, I'm not happy with the advisor I have chosen originally. I'd like another one. And
mhm,
that's a big deal. I mean, sometimes you're going to get into somebody you might not mesh. I mean, your philosophy and their philosophy might not be meeting your expectations. Okay. The second thing you want to think about now going into the business is you have a retirement account set up for you. You can put away as much as $24,500 this year into your retirement account. Well, since you own the business, you can also decide to match that and you can match it up to 100%. So this year, that's $49,000 that could go into your retirement account. And the very first thing I tell people, where'd the money come from? It came generated from the business you started. What did that do for you? Well, number one, it reduced your taxable income by $24,500. It reduced the business's taxable income by $24,500, plus the employee is an expense. So that reduced the taxation there. And there's also a profit sharing provision, depending on whether you have employees or not. But and depending on the profit of the business, that you can also kick into the retirement plans. So, an individual that owned their own business that didn't have full time employees that exercised this plan, if they were under the age of 50, could put $70,000 into the retirement account. If they were over the age of 50, they could put $80,000 of the retirement account. You've reduced your taxable income, you reduced the taxable income of the C Corp, and you've contributed to your retirement plan and more than 100% matched it. Now, what if you can't do that? Well, you're only obligated to put 1% of a salary you've taken out of that business into that 401k account. So that's the
mhm,
short term. The long term play is when you sell this business, the amount or the percentage of stock owned by that retirement account, the Rob's account, that money goes back into the retirement account or should, okay?
mhm.
if it goes back in there, it's exempt from capital gains tax. So because it's an investment through your 401k. So if you're over the age of 59 and a half, you can start drawing it out. Or if you wanted to take a little bit of profit on there and not be taxed on the whole amount, you've got those options.
Mhm. So you have, because you have this retirement account you control, you have all those nice advantages in year that you described, being able to make contributions, do matching, do profit sharing. So those are good short-term tax strategies. And then long-term, when it comes time to sell the business, the capital gains on that, because it's whatever portion of it was owned by the 401k account, that part will be exempt from capital gains tax simply because it was owned by a 401k. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, I use a scenario. If you invested $100,000 into the business, 95,000 came from your IRA or a 401k from a prior employer, and you put 5% of your own money into it, which is the way we set up these plans. So you put that money in, and now you sell that business for $500,000. Okay, that means $400,000 of profit from that business. Well, 95% of that would be sheltered from capital gains because it would go back into the retirement account. That's
Mhm.
significant. So if you're paying capital
Yes.
gains tax of 25% on 400,000 by not having this plan, um, you're giving Uncle Sam and your governor a lot of money.
Very good. So clearly there are some nice compelling reasons. It's access to capital you wouldn't otherwise have. It's a non-debt strategy, right? You're not taking out debt. There's no loan. There's no repayment here. It's an investment. And you've got these, again, you have these tax advantages. So lots of things that are good about it. Let's talk about, things that could go wrong. Let's say somebody tries to go out and sets one of these things up, or after the fact they're not keeping up with the administrative requirements. What are some of the things that can come back to bite them if they don't do this properly with the right advice and guidance?
Okay, worst case scenario. I don't like to talk bad about competitors, but there are a
Mhm.
few out there that said, "Oh, let us set it up, and then you're on your own to go find your own administrator." It has to be administered by a certified company that specializes in 401k. So that's your
Mhm.
third party administrator.
Okay.
Um, there are some companies said you're on your own. Well, you don't know anything about them. What you're really looking for is one company that's going to manage the plan, keep your plan in compliance, is there for support where you can call them during regular business hours, not get nickled and dime for your questions.
Mhm.
They answer those questions, they make sure your plan is in compliance, and they check it throughout the year for you. There's the big advantage. What could go wrong? So I just painted the picture of how we protect someone from doing something
Things going
wrong.
wrong? Yeah. Mhm.
Here's the biggest thing I think where you might run into an issue is where somebody has multiple companies. Let's say they have an LLC, let's say they have an S Corp, and let's say they have one of these plans. And they want to get creative and they want to say, well, I've got money coming in from here, but the tax might be less on this company here. It's called commingling on funds, where they said, don't make this check out to here, make this check out to here. That's where you could run into some problems with the IRS if that's audited. The other way is, and it sounds really stupid, but I actually had somebody say this to me. They said, well, what would
Okay.
stop me from moving over $100,000 and writing myself a check for 95,000? And I said, the IRS. This is because they're going to know that that's not the spirit of what the way this plan was set up.
So the IRS, if they wanted to audit and see that you did something that looked more like a distribution, they could come back and give you the penalties and treat it like a distribution? Is that what could happen? Or
Yeah, they sure could. Right. You do
Mm.
something wrong and they're saying, well, okay, you didn't follow the structure of the plan and how it was set up. And I don't want to overcomplicate it because it's run
Of
just like
course
in
not.
any other business.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
LLCs and S corps, they can get in trouble the same type of way. But
Mhm.
I just do want to point that out that it is something that's set up, as a retirement account and also an investment account. So, and a way to pay yourself, of course. So, with all that being said, just follow the rules. You're not going to run into
Mhm.
any problems, and it's very simple.
Very good, very good. And you mentioned there, the last thing you said was, and you pay yourself. That's one question that often comes up. In fact, I've heard some people say, I thought with Rob's you couldn't pay yourself. but my understanding was as a C Corp with a Rob's investment, it's mandatory. It's required that you are an employee of your company and that you are taking a reasonable salary based on the work that you're doing, and therefore the funds that go into your account, whether it comes from Rob's or your own liquidity or whatever, once those funds get into your business account, you're just operating business as usual, even if that means a salary to you as the owner as part of your expenses. Is that accurate? Is that true, or are there caveats to that?
Well, let me try to clarify. You could take us, it depends on who's set up the plans. There's a few
Mhm.
companies, and each plan, although they're approved by the IRS, are somewhat different. And you'll hear
Okay.
that on there out there from different companies. The way our plans are and the way most plans are set up, not all, are that you can draw a salary from day one, just like an initial public offering, right? You've got
Mhm.
expenses, you're running the business, you could take a reasonable salary. Okay.
Mhm.
How does, if somebody will ask me sometimes, well, how do I determine that? Well, what would you have to pay somebody to do the position you're in is a good reason. You can go to salary.com and look that up. That's really easy to do.
Mhm.
That's one situation where, you're going to draw a salary. Now, some people might say, well, I don't want to draw a salary. Okay. You don't have to. That's totally up to you. Um, some plans require that you draw a salary. Ours gives you that flexibility. They're custom planned, and I'm not trying to, promote myself here, but what I'm saying is each plan is a little bit different.
So the requirement is that you're an employee of the C Corp, but what you do about salary and draw, that's a decision you make as you design the plan. Is
You
that fair?
summarized it perfectly.
Okay, very good. Let's talk a little bit about eligible accounts because not all retirement accounts are equally available to someone for a Rob's rollover. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What are some of the things someone would want to look out for?
Well, the first thing you have to know is where is their money? Where is their retirement money? If it is in a corporate plan, there's only one way that they could access that and do that while they're still employed. And that plan, the company plan, would have to have what they call an in service distribution clause. We would look at
Okay.
that clause, and essentially what that means is that yes, you can continue your employment. Yes, we can have funds withheld from your check as you wish. It doesn't have to go into the corporate plan. It can go into another qualified plan. That would be the exception where it would be eligible. The other type of eligibility are any prior plan from a previous employer would be eligible. Any IRA or 401k that is non Roth would be
Okay.
eligible. There's also, and I've run into this a couple of times, where somebody has left a place of employment, but left their money in the place where they were previously employed. I think that's crazy. But yes,
No.
whatever is in that plan can come out and be used. So that is a question that's come up a couple of times. One other thing where it's ineligible, an inherited retirement plan can't be used as part
Oh,
of it.
interesting. So there are some things to know there, but largely, if you're an active employee with current funds going into a current active 401k plan with that company, unless they have an in-service distribution clause, that money may not be available for Rob's rollover. But if it's any money from a previous plan or a non-Roth IRA or 401k, it's typically eligible.
That's correct. Sometimes you run into someone that has a split. They have some Roth and some eligible retirement funds that are traditional. It can still be done, but they know, and the way we would do it is we would set up the plan with the eligible funds, get that all set in place, move the funds over into the business checking account. And then if they needed the Roth funds, they could move them over. They're taxed on the Roth as a penalty. But other than that,
Okay.
we can do that. We have to get creative sometimes, but it's doable.
Very good. Let's go into some myths, Al. I mean, I think one thing that comes up. Yeah, I've explored Rob's personally for some businesses that I was evaluating starting myself, and I did a fairly deep dive. I talked to several experts, yourself included,
Mhm.
CPA, tax professional, talked to attorney, talked to a bunch of different people, And I was surprised at how many different opinions there were and how the advice could be so contradictory between respected professionals. One myth I just want to hear you talk about, I'll call it a myth. Maybe it's not a myth. But one thing I heard was, oh, you don't want to do ROBS because it's a C Corp. And if you do a C Corp, you'll have double taxation and that'll be bad for you. What do you think about that statement? Is it always wrong? Is it always right? Or does the truth lie somewhere in the middle?
It's somewhere in the middle. Here's how that works. Because it is a standalone entity and because you're a W 2, you're paying taxes on the business profit of the C Corp and you're paying taxes on your income if you've taken from the C Corp. That's where they say there's double taxation. But they're overlooking a lot of options here. Number one, what is the purpose of a C Corp? To keep enough money in there to run the operation, some rainy day funds, and to invest back into the business or your retirement account, which is part of that. So if you're looking at this as just a way to fund a business and not take advantage of the other options and then you're probably going about it the wrong way. And that's where they're coming from their position. If I can kind of look at it from that point of view. However, what they fail to mention is, whether you're an LLC or an S Corp, you're going to pay taxes, self employment tax, for example. You still have to pay the other taxes. C Corps have more deductions available to them than S Corps and LLC. So you have to look at it that way. Now, if somebody is going to self fund as opposed to um, let's say, take on a loan or use a retirement account, and they're just trying to weigh, well, I've got the cash on hand, or I've got it in my retirement account and cash on hand. What should I do? Well, to me, cash is king, and other people's money is what you want to do. Where does the money go when you put it into a retirement account anyway? Well, it's going into small businesses looking for your money in a mutual fund to grow their business, right? So why wouldn't you invest in yourself? So I can look at it from a lot of different angles. And then probably the one that I wanted to bring up is a lot of times you'll get a CPA or a financial advisor who wants to hang on to their money say, oh, just go get a loan, go get an SBA loan. Okay, well, let's look at that. If you went to get an SBA loan, which is a 10-year loan, let's say it's a 150 loan, you're going to be paying back about $85,000 in interest if it goes to term. So what's more costly? You got to look at it from all angles.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, if any advisor tries to make it sound like there's a cut and dried answer to this, you really want to encourage them, to advocate for yourself, encourage them to look at what you're trying to do with your business, get some pro formas in place, try to understand how you would mitigate these things, because it sounds like many people have successfully used the ROBS plan to launch their business and to execute, very effective tax strategies and have come out really well on the other side using these instruments.
I agree. What I do, and again, with our company, is we talk to them not just about getting funded, and we go over everything that we just spoke to here, but we ask them, what's your short term strategy? What's your long term strategy? And, outside of just your strategy in business, what's your strategy in life? What do you plan? Are you planning to buy another house? There's a lot of different factors that come into this before they make a decision. Our job is to educate them and to bring them, all of these things to consider and then see if it's the right option for them.
Very, very good. So we talked about the C corp double taxation myth, if you will, that just requires a deeper dive. What other things have you heard, misunderstandings or myths around the ROBS program?
Well, it's more along the line of our indoctrination, if you will. It's I use it's kind of funny. I might date myself a little bit here, but we've always been told just put your money in a retirement account, set it and forget it, and you're going to be a multimillionaire when you retire. And I always
Mhm.
remind clients, and I bring this up. I go, this isn't like that old commercial where, you put your chicken in the thing and you turn it on and it's done, it's perfect every time and everybody compliments you. It doesn't work that way. And
Mhm.
life happens. There's so many things that are unpredictable that nobody could see coming in life. And if you just go back 30 years, we've had recessions. We've had a president say, read my lips, no more taxes. We get more taxes. We've had multiple recessions. We've had 911. We've had periods of non growth. We've had COVID. All of these things affect the stock market, wars, all of those things. And the reality is, over a long period of time, which we mentioned before, really the return on a retirement account is about 7.5, maybe 8%. You might get 20% one year, but you could lose 20% the following year, depending on what is going on in the world.
Okay, so you encourage thoughtful planning, consider the options, and educated decisions, not just using general rules of thumb as to whether this is good or whether this is bad, which is good advice, I think. Yeah. When you look at people who actually use ROBs to start their business, is it typically their only thing they do? It's 100% of the business funded through ROBs. Do you usually see it combined with SBA loans or with other funding sources? How does it fit into an overall funding strategy?
That's a great question. It kind of goes in cycles, and it
Yes.
really depends on the economy too. If the cost of money is expensive, like say on an SBA loan, I do typically more ROBs or a combination split where they're using some of their ROBs and taking on less debt. It also depends on the type of business it is. If it's going to be like a service related business, less than $150,000, and people have a significant amount of retirement, most of the time they're just going to self fund it with ROBs. Also depends on age demographics. You know, it also depends on where they are financially, as far as, in other words, do they need a tax write-off, where they might want to take on a loan, or are they looking to say, I need a hedge in my retirement account and I'm not really crazy about the stock market. So again, these are all questions that we talk about when we have a consult with a client. And I'd like to say I'm a financial strategist. I love to talk strategy with people and say really where we're at and kind of take a real deep dive, as you said earlier, into what they want to achieve.
I think that's a really great perspective you bring and a valuable one, helping people ask questions they might not otherwise think to. There is a bit of a, I don't know if you would call it a tension or what though, and I'd like to know how you navigate this. When you have trusted partners that your clients have, they have a CPA or maybe a tax professional or a financial advisor, and you're helping them formulate a strategy that works for funding using instruments like ROBs that you know very, very well. You know the pros and cons, you know the advantages. And then they take this back to their other professionals that they rely on, and those professionals may not understand this, and they steer them away, or they caution them, or give them warnings. How do you navigate that with a client? When a client just wants what's best for themselves in their situation, um, what kind of advice do you give them on how to work through this? Do you help them bring the tax guy around or the CPA around, or how does that typically navigate?
Excellent question. First of all, I hope, and I always tell them, hey, if you have additional questions, please come back to me. But we've got on the phone with CPAs. We've got on the phone with financial advisors, and we don't want to embarrass them as much as sometimes
Sure.
you want to if they've been arrogant or whatever. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
what we do is
Sit
we
down.
just go over the facts to say, well, let's get them on the phone. Let's talk this through. I mean, maybe they have a perspective I don't know about or something. But what I
Sure.
often find is it's just off the cuff. You shouldn't do this. You also have to consider where they're coming from. CPAs are notoriously conservative, and they also don't know anything about SBAs, and I'm generalizing here. In general, they don't.
Understood. Yeah.
They're not up to terms on what it is. And like I mentioned before, I would tell them, well, look, if he takes on a 10-year loan, which is his only other option, he or she, well, they're going to be paying this much back in interest. Well, that'll scare a CPA back right there. 85,000. Well, save your money. Don't do anything. Keep working. If
Mhm.
it's a financial advisor, and I'll tell this to the client, I says, understand where they're coming from. They make their money based on working your money. Go back and look at your statements and see how well you've done, not just this year, not just last year, not just on a promise of next year. See how well you've done. And then understand that there over a long period of time, you're only going to get this much of a return and you're missing out on all those other advantages that we're talking about. So that's what we bring up on the phone. And it doesn't happen too often, but sometimes we get a CPA on the phone. They want to charge them for the hour, and I said, "Well, I'm not charging. I mean, whose advice is more valuable?" And on the other end, you get a financial advisor on the phone. Um, it's not a difficult conversation to have. We say, "Look, they can still invest with you and still do this too," and usually that kind of mitigates the situation.
I think the real key is for clients. I know clients of mine, clients of yours, encourage them to self advocate, right? They have to understand these instruments and the interplay, like you said, the motivations of everybody, right? Everybody has a reason for the advice they give. And we're all typically working in their best interests, right? I mean, maybe there's some exceptions out there, but I think most of us in the profession of helping others, we really want to help others from our perspective. But it really is incumbent on the client to understand these options, understand the pros and cons, and realize that at some point they may need to make a decision about whose advice they're going to take, right?
Right.
Based on an educated knowledge of what the roads ahead or the potential paths are. So
Well, this
I
is
think
what
it's a very yeah.
I was just saying,
Go
well,
ahead.
this is
Yeah.
what you do is where I would direct it back to someone like yourself and say, okay, you might have to be the referee here and say, well, I've heard this, I've heard that, and say, well, here's my perspective on it. So when I'm working with consultants, many times I'll tell them, go back to your consultant and talk this through. And that way you'll get a neutral point of view.
Yeah, it really is. It's good to have a variety of advisors, and that's exactly what I try to do is ask them, what are they hearing? What's making sense? What red flags are they experiencing? Do they think that advisor A, advisor B, or advisor C fully understands what the other ones are saying? Because we should all seek first to understand and then be understood, but we don't always do that, right? So it's a good point. There's dialogue and discussion, and usually a couple of iterations to get people on the right track. But I think it's an important conversation to have, and not one to rule out quickly. Right. One thing I didn't don't think I'd mentioned earlier, Al, but I wanted to ask you about it. There's some people who we know that the American savings account is at an all-time low. More money is going into retirement accounts than in liquid cash, right? A lot of people are saving money in their retirement accounts, so it's one of the largest assets after their home, maybe. So when they want to tap this money, it's the biggest pool for them to tap without going into debt necessarily. But sometimes people are very risk averse because this is an investment and it could be a bad investment, right? They could invest money in a business that fails. What happens in that case? Like what people who are risk averse about this, like what how should they understand what they're really putting on the line here?
May I give you an example?
Please.
Okay. I had a client today that said, well, rather than take on debt, rather than use my retirement account, I'd rather do a HELOC because there's no payments for a couple of months. He says, well, I don't want to pay fees and I'm very risk adverse. And I said, well, then why would you put your home up as a second to get a loan or to, and he goes, well, it's a HELOC. I go, yeah, it's your money. But I said, if you need that money for an emergency, I said, or you wanted to go out and have another purchase, that's debt and that's more risk than using a retirement account because yes, I get it. But again, it boils down to working and doing your due diligence on the business itself. Is it long-term sustainable? What you're evaluating and doing your evaluations on, people that own this type of business, whether it's a franchise or that type of industry. Knowing the audience to which the client or the business is serving. Is it service related or product related? Knowing that, knowing the competition as well. Looking at if your people are coming into your state, moving in or moving out. Uh, age demographics, all of those things go into play and say, all right, if all of these things make sense, or most of them make sense on the pros and cons, then why wouldn't I want to do this and not take on debt? Because they know the income would be going there. The only unknown is how much effort and talent an individual has putting into their business.
Yeah, it really is almost the ultimate vote of confidence in yourself to say, I'm going to take my hard earned money that I put in a retirement account that I'm counting on other people to make me, a profit on this, take it out and say, I'm going to now put that money in my control and I'm going to put this to work for me in my business. So, no, I like how you framed that up. That was a good example.
Well, that's,
Look,
there's
oh, yeah,
followers
go
and
ahead.
there's leaders. And you said it best just right there. You said, do I trust somebody else to do it for me without any management whatsoever? At some point, you're going to have to manage them. Or do I trust myself at least a little bit? It doesn't have to be my whole retirement, but it can be some of it.
Yeah, and that's a really great point too, Al. The thought that people may have half million, million, multi-million dollar retirement accounts, carving out 100K, 250, 300K to start a franchise business. It's not that they're putting their whole retirement at risk, right? It's still they're hedging and like you said, diversification of that retirement fund. So, yeah, no, all good considerations. Let, let's talk a little bit, Al, about the overhead associated with a starting going down the Rob's route. There are initial fees and there are some ongoing fees. What should a person think about? What should they know about the overhead and the ongoing commitment if they go down the Rob's path financially? What are the new expense lines that are going to be on their books?
Sure. One-time startup fee, 49.95. Our competitors and stuff are fairly close to that. They might be a little more. That's a one-time fee. That's to set everything up, get it approved by the IRS, have the plans. You get two tax ID numbers. You get one for your 401k account. You get one for the business. Starting there. The next thing that you're going to have to pay fees on is the 145 a month, and that is the maintenance and all-inclusive fees for any questions, keeping your plan in compliance, making any necessary tax changes as they apply to a retirement account. They happen all the time. Congress comes up with a new law, over that. IRS has some new thoughts on that. All of those changes are done all behind the scene. Don't have to worry about it. A lot of times business things happen, lives happen. A lot of questions come up in business and that might affect, and somebody might say, well, geez, does this affect my plan? Simple phone call. No, not getting nickel and dime. The only other fee they have is at the end of the year, the IRS requires what they call a valuation of the stock. Again, that's all handled by the third party administrator. I'll just round it up at $600 a year, each and every year. So after the first year, you're paying 145 a month and 600 for the valuation. People say, well, why do I have to pay for that valuation? I go, think about the long-term strategy. I go, when you go to sell your business, too many people do not do it correctly. They don't plan to sell their business. They don't, and then they go and say, well, I want this much for it. Well, if your returns don't justify it, they're not going to get their asking price. However, if you've done this and you do your valuation each and every year, you have 10 years of value will show that where that business has gone and what it's truly worth based upon those valuations.
When it comes to the actual investment people have to make to get started with Rob's, a one-time fee to set it up around $5,000 ish is correct for June of 2026, right? And then you have about 150 a month for administration and an annual $600 or so a year for the valuation. That's what they're taking on to have access to all the benefits we talked about and to have access to that capital. Is that a summary?
Yeah, 145. One thing I should point out though, those are all legitimate business expenses. So those are line items that offsets profit. So are you really paying that much?
Mhm. Right, right. Because yeah, it has the tax benefits itself there. So, Al, I really, really appreciated this deep dive today. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Is there anything that we didn't talk about today? Anything that you'd really like our listeners to know and understand about Robs, or something to keep in mind as they evaluate whether this deserves to be part of their funding strategy?
I think if I had anything to say, and what I do tell people is at least take a look at it and consider it, and really just put the time in to look and say, what is the cost of money? Not just initially, but long term. And what is, and take all of the factors into consideration, tax advantages, long term savings. So, we talk about contributing to the retirement account. You're still investing in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. You can have gold and silver in there. You can have real estate in there. My point is that's all. Not only you're just putting that money in, but it's working for you as opposed to giving it to the government in tax. So, I think it's fair to say most people are not happy with how the government spends money in many different ways. Wouldn't you rather have control of that in your portfolio? That's my strategy.
Very good. Al, really appreciate you taking time with me today. Thank you. High value stuff. Always a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, this conversation covered a lot of ground, but I'll leave you with this. ROBS is a legitimate, well-established funding vehicle, and whether it belongs in your plan is a question worth exploring. But to answer it well, you have to do your homework. The professionals in your corner, your CPA, your financial advisor, may have opinions about ROBS. I encourage you to have a healthy discussion and make sure the advice you're getting comes from someone who knows the nuances of this program at least as well as you do. Your funding strategy is too important to be shaped by incomplete information. The more you understand, the better the conversations you'll have with your advisors, and the better positioned everyone is to help you make the right call for your situation. My name is Scott Elliott. I work with people who are exploring business ownership through franchising and who want a knowledgeable guide through the process. If that's you, I'd love to connect. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Ownership Essentials.